So how did All Saints Parish start? Well, if you're going to talk about how All Saints Parish started, first of all you would have to back up about 3 miles down the road to a little town called Marysburg. Marysburg came about in the area of about 1855 to 1860. Before that was called Lake Washington. And the first people there built a small log cabin church that was 20 by 40. Well, the 20 by 40 served them for about 5 or 6 years, and they began to notice that with the influx of people coming into the countryside, they weren't going to make it with such a small church. It was crowded to the seams. So they decided in 1869 that they would build a much bigger church that would be 40 by 80, and then on the end they would put a altar, and outside they had a lean-to for wood because it was a wood-burning church at the time, and that would suffice. Well, the population continued to grow. It was all Irish Roman Catholics at first, and then slowly people started to move in. Well, Bernard Kortuem moved in first. At least he was one of the first ones, and then very soon after that the Volks moved in. Well, the reason that Kortuem had such good success is that he was German, but in spite of being German he was Roman Catholic as well, and he actually got the Irish to help him build his home. And then the Volk family was over on Lake Emily, and they had cut all the wood in the area that was any good to them, so they decided that they would move somewhere else where the wood was more plentiful, and they moved in next to Kortuem. In fact, they bought all the adjacent land next to Kortuem and set up the sawmill, and it was the biggest sawmill in the countryside. So the Germans began to flow into the countryside too, and that made the population of Marysburg bulge. And everybody would come to church, and when they would come to church, some of them would have to stand outside and listen through the windows, and some would stand in the vestibule of the church and listen to what the parish priest had to say. And it was getting very crowded. And that worked during the summer. But when it came to winter, of course, it became totally impractical. There were horses and buggies all over the place, and people were standing outside the window huddling under horse blankets to try to hear the Mass, and it just didn't do anymore. Well, there was a priest there named Father Sullivan, and Father Sullivan began to see that he was at a crisis with room, and he had to think up something that he could do that would relieve the problem, that would not get rid of some of the people, but divide up some of the people. At that time, the Archdiocese of Winona had been established, and there was a bishop over there named Bishop Cotter. Sullivan wanted to convince Bishop Cotter that he should start another parish. And he didn't really know how to do this, but he came up with this plan. And the plan was that he would start a temperance movement. Actually, he was pretty much anti-drinking, and so it fit nicely, and it gave him the drive to do it. He started at Marysburg, but Marysburg really didn't have much of a problem. I mean, there was no police force, there was no jail. There was about 40 families in town. It did not have anything that came close to the need for law enforcement. There was, I think, one place in town where you could drink if you wanted to. But now MadisonLake was different. The train had come through, and being the train had come through, all of the people from Mankato and from everywhere could now cruise through MadisonLake if they wanted. They could stop and drink, and it had been a resort rather than a town, but the coming of the train changed all that. And now it was getting kind of wild. It had 5 bars, and there were people that were murdered that were murdered in town There were people found by the railroad tracks that they didn't know who their names were, and all kinds of affairs, mostly having booze at the roots. So he was gonna change that in Madison Lake and kill two birds with one stone. So he went up to Madison Lake after he had Marysburg all signed up, because everybody from Marysburg knew everybody from Madison Lake. It was only 3 miles away. And he began to sign up everybody at Madison Lake. Like most temperance movements, it didn't have that much success, and the reason that it didn't have much success, that it wasn't structured quite as well as successful organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous. That didn't really exist back then. But he got them to sign up, and the bar owners in town were just angry at him for taking away all their business. But he was able to go over and say to Bishop Cotter, now look at here. These guys in Madison Lake are coming around. And I know that you're worried about 2 weak parishes instead of 1 strong parish, but I think that you should give it a shot and let Madison Lake establish its own parish in the Diocese of Winona. Because they really would get a draw even from the north side of Madison Lake, because Marysburg, if you walk out the front door, is only about 300 feet from Blue Earth County, and Blue Earth County was Winona Diocese. And so they would get the hog share of everybody that was on the other side of the road, which was the county line road. And Cotter went for it. So Cotter now had himself a parish, but he had to decide, or between him and Sullivan or somebody, decide exactly what would make up the half of the parish, and it didn't look likely that the county line road alone was going to do it. So Marysburg split along an ethnic line. There were a lot of Germans here now. There were a lot of Irish that always were here, and even though there wasn't really that much of a conflict between the German and the Irish, a little bit, because some of the parish priests used to hear confessions and say Mass in German, and that had all gone away, but that had all gone away everywhere. Now, it came to the point where there had to be a split that would leave everybody in friendship. So everybody that went up to Madison Lake would be satisfied, and everybody that stayed at Marysburg would likewise be satisfied. So it was along a line where the Germans decided that they would go to Madison Lake, and the Irish decided that they would stay where they were. And they did that. And they went up and successfully built a church that was not much bigger than Marysburg Church itself. They were so convinced that it was going to work that they established a graveyard, and from what my neighbor Ann Dorn told me before she died, that actually the people up at Madison Lake, when they got the parish established, even came out to Marysburg and dug up some of their relatives and took them on up there with them. Now, I've never really sat down and examined that to see how truthful that is, but I don't think she had any reason to lie to me, and she would probably know. In any event, it took off and it flourished. There were some families, like the Kortuem family and the Volks, that had been here so long and were so deeply rooted in Marysburg that they didn't go up there. The Kortuems because they had come here in the 1860s, and the Volks because they had moved here from Lake Emily, and everybody around here were people that they knew, and therefore, being they knew those people, they needed to get the wood off of their land as a crop for their sawmill. And so Volks had actually 2 reasons to stay. There were families that were even further away from Madison Lake than Volks or from Kortuem, and they decided that they would go right past Marysburg and go up to Madison Lake, which was their choice. The problem was with Marysburgers that were on the Blue Earth County side of the county line road, is that they would have to pay their dues up at Madison Lake, and then they would turn around if they were going to Marysburg and have to again pay their dues at Marysburg. It was worth it though, because in the winter, if you think about it, they would have to drive 4 miles from, for instance, Kortuem's place or Volk's place up to Madison Lake. And then if they were going to Marysburg, they would only have to drive a mile. That was okay to drive 4 miles in the summer up there, but it added in total an extra 6 miles. If the winter was poor and they came out of church and the weather had taken a turn for the worse, they would have to gut it out or stay in Madison Lake, which they didn't really have any way of doing that. So many of them that were German decided that they would simply stay at Marysburg. And so the church became established up there, and Marysburg and Madison Lake have always been very compatible with each other, in spite of the fact that one is a German community and the other one is an Irish community. They seem to have been welded together by the fact that in early times, when things were really rough, the Germans and the Irish in the area got along pretty well. So they still do. There's a kind of a mutual understanding between Marysburg and between Madison Lake, between All Saints, simply because everybody at Marysburg knows everybody from Madison Lake, and everybody from Madison Lake knows just about everybody from Marysburg. And so that's how it all got started. It's worked well, and it continues to work well to this day.